Sup YouTube, I'm AG64 with another challenge run. This time a returning one. With the release of the Miitopia port on Switch, definitely wasn't a coincidence, trust me, I decided to revisit my first ever challenge run. One I fittingly called the Boostless run, with very simple rules. No buying new clothing pieces, except for appearance, which I did, and no eating grubs of any kind. The main reason I wanted to redo this challenge is because, well, I've grown a lot since 2019, and I simply wanted to see how I'd fare in this first of challenges with all the knowledge I've built up over the years. And now in 2021, I thought the time was finally right to do as such. So be sure to hit like and subscribe, as well as share this video, channel, and my Instagram to those you love. And with that being said, let's go! So I began the run as one normally does in Greenhorn, picking Popstar as my job and starting to build my team. Now, the team I used consists of my OCs, you know, the ones I've been using since the original Boostless run, with the minor alterations I implemented in later runs. And all of them had their normal jobs in tow. Citra, I call her Kira, the chef, Leo the cool cleric, and Isla the energetic pop star. And yes, there is a very valid reason why I didn't specify Kira's personality, but keep in mind that for most of the run she was kind, and a kind scientist at that. The butterfly, and more obviously the slime, were as easy as burning a child without his mother's consent, but the other bosses in the demo area weren't as forgiving. In fact, they upheld quite the hostile presence. The boulder and the mouse were both hard for their decent damage output and AoE attacks, as well as some annoying minions to break through that also support their bosses very well. And the imp was hard for its high damage output. Plus, since I was a pop star, I couldn't redirect my attacks at the bosses. Instead, I had to kill all the minions up first. Still, the strategies I used to beat all three bosses were practically identical. First, I beat the mouse, since I knew I'd get the safe spot along the way, or at least during the fight. Then I just bulked up and hit them as much as possible with Kira and Leo, who both did decent damage with Kira's relatively high attack stat and Leo's cool crits. So Isla and I encore spammed them both. Now this was far from easy, but a viable strategy. All of these bosses gave me a moderately tough time, especially the imp due to its destructive attacks, and this is a trend. But with luck and patience, I overcame all three. But from here, I saw a crack in my team. As from fighting the normal enemies on the way to the golem, I noticed that the damage output of my team was severely lacking. And seeing as my defenses were painfully low, quite literally, that was a huge problem. Which I also noticed had a massive effect on the golem fight. But the golem fight wasn't the worst thing in the world, though not easy in the slightest. But upon reaching Arid Frontier, it finally hit me. A realization that made me scared of what was about to come even more than I was before. I was running a defensive team in a boostless run. Basically, by not picking mage and preserving it for Realm of the Fae like I typically do, I doomed myself into using a team that is both weak and frail. And the next boss to come was, of course, the Griffin. And seeing as that challenged me even with both a mage and a warrior, I was terrified. Very terrified. As it turns out, that fear was justified, since just like what happened 2 years ago, I was bulldozed by offense my team had no business dealing with, since the Griffin hits really hard and hits thrice instead of twice. But now, without mage and warrior, I couldn't even do that much damage, and thus the grind began. Naturally, I was a stubborn little prick and refused to intentionally grind normal levels, instead using the roulette to grind friendship levels, meaning I also got some normal levels along the way, but that isn't the point. My plan was to use the two popsters on my team and massively abuse assists to get some good damage off, using the only move my team had that actually did semi-respectable damage, which was Kira's Flambe. By leveling up the friendship levels of both me and Kira, as well as Leo and Isla for good measure, to level 22. As I intended to get Isla to use Love Song for me and her to pincer Kira when she uses Flambe, and thus boost her damage output from mediocre to something actually worthwhile. And the extra levels I unintentionally got were also helpful for me to take hits with more HP. I also swapped Kira's personality from kind to cautious for even more damage using Warm Up. That kinda made the fight not really hard, but also not easy either. Also, to set the stage for what was about to come, despite being an entire team of overleveled Miis, the fight still took me more than 20 minutes to finish. And now take that to a boss that is 4 level 10, and one that hits like someone took hell and threw it in a tiny little noggin, and we may or may not have something that'll take a day to try and beat. Oh, it took a day? Great. So, the General. It has 420 HP, nice, 30 defense, and 50 bloody 8 attack. And as such, I was in some serious trouble. This was sort of the ultimate culmination of the bullshit I've bestowed upon myself. This fight was originally pretty tough, but now that I like actual damage output, it was seriously a nightmare. Fun fact, I've actually missed several Zoom lessons in my attempts to win this fight. It was that hard. My strategy was viable, but required a ton of luck to succeed. I changed my personality to cool and Kira's to laid back and set off. My plan was to encore spam Kira alongside Isla to let her go berserk with Flambe as the whole team pincers her. You see, I know the damage calculations of Miitopia, well, for physical damage at least, since magic damage is very whack. And thus, I figured that with Kira's 26 attack stat, each Flambe would normally deal 7 or 8 damage. With Show Off, they'd deal 9 or 10 damage, and with Get Serious, they'd deal from 14 to 16 damage. And Pincer makes an ally attack as well, with his attack having a 1.5 multiplier. But in theory, 42 Shaw Flambe hits with either a max roll or normal Flambe hits with a few pincers, or Landa hands for that matter, would be enough to take the General out. Meanwhile, Isla gave us MP recovery with Energetic and being Popstar, while Leo and I dodged attacks with Cool's Avoid and supported the team in our own special ways. Was this a risky gambit? Well, duh, of course it was. But did it work? Somehow it did! But keep in mind all the things I needed to take notes of and be prepared for during battle. First, Leo was still fragile, so if he got hit by a Megaton Punch, he would have been OHKO'd on the spot, and the lack of revives could easily snowball into a guaranteed loss. There's also this monster known as Speed Wars, as besides Leo, everyone went to Speed Wars. You see, Speed Wars makes the competing units take their turns randomly and not in a strict order, and it happens if 2 or more units are 5 or less speed points apart from each other. The General as well as Kira had 15 speed, Isla had 16, and I had 18, and as such, all 4 of us went to Speed Wars, and on turn 1 I needed the General to lose the Speed Wars unless I wanted to get seriously beaten up without an initial hit off. It was extremely arduous, but I pulled it off. Now let's move on to next door. Immediately after and during Greenhorn, I was well aware of what my next door job would be. And it would be Imp, of course, since I knew exactly the mistakes of not having a magic attacker on my team, which now also consisted of Maria the cool pop star, Robin the stubborn warrior, and Ellie the cautious scientist. I know I said I wanted to and later on did give Kira scientist, but I still thought having a scientist in next door would help me out a lot, and planned to change Ellie into a vampire later on as I unlocked the job. Pretty dumb I know, but hey, I did it, there's no going back. With the new team now created, next door was actually decently easy. Maybe it's because I had to deal with what I did to myself in Greenhorn, or that Ellie and I just swept through enemies with ease, but it's probably both. The only pretty hard boss was the duo of Sword and Shield, because I needed revives to survive the Sword's land hand attacks, and without those revives I was forced to make pretty creative use of the sprinkles and safe spot I had at my disposal, as well as forcing myself to kill the shield immediately, which was annoying but manageable. This is actually a very interesting thing because of the Pharaoh Boss, which originally was one hell of a fight, but now was actually not that hard. Now, it wasn't easy at all and required smart use of my equipment, but it was pretty fun and not that hard. So in short, yeah, just bring magic attackers to a boostless run. Now we've reached Realm of the Fae, and as I said before, I wanted to and then pick Mage here, with the allies being Pastilda the air-headed flower, Miitopia the energetic princess, and Regin the usually stubborn but now laid-back imp. And like next door, this wasn't much of a struggle, although a good chunk of the bosses hit very hard, and I can see them being a big obstacle, but I've got Karma on my side, and together they were no match for my magical onslaught. I also had some interesting discoveries regarding how genuinely easy this place is to beat, since, you see, I anticipated that the first level of this world would pose a bit of a threat, due to Mage having garbage physical stats as well as a garbage HP stat, and this is before level 2, thus I lacked any sort of magic attack. but it ended up being easier than I expected, even easier than the first level of Next Door, which admittedly wasn't that challenging, but I did have to do a personality switch from kinda cool, so I considered it a harder level. My assumption is that the pawns were simply that much frailer than the Scary Scorpion, and I had a speed advantage against them that I lacked in Next Door with Imp. Then the Cacti stat and the evil dumb childish bird that I really don't want to see in HD have the same stats, and thus the speed of Mage was even more apparent. I don't think it'd be surprising to hear that I didn't struggle much here, since originally I didn't struggle either. But considering the offensively capable bosses that inhabit this place, it's a pretty strange thing to say out loud. Thank God it didn't do Realm of the Fae with a stall team. That would have ended really badly. The hardest boss out of these was probably the Frog, since its basic attack could shred my team apart with minimal effort, and Bad Breath was even scarier. I'm pretty sure that fight could have been pretty run, but I did it first try anyways, so it's just getting a minor mention. Anyways, Karkatan was f***ing brutal. And why was Karkatan really hard, you might be asking? Well, the answer is that it wasn't hard because of actual difficulty. No, it's because I'm a retard, that's why. First of all, let's talk about everyone's favorite subject. Why I should have picked Mage and Greenhorn! More specifically, why I shouldn't have picked Mage in Realm of the Fae. Because not only did I need Mage and Greenhorn, but picking Mage in Realm of the Fae hindered me severely. Let's rewind. In the original Boostless run, the Karkatan Ascent bosses were a total breeze. With Imp, a job that fun fact I picked by total accident, like the Popster I picked in Next Door, and the Great Sage, I sold all three of them. But now that I'm a mage, I realized I made a grave error. All of the Karkatan Ascent bosses have attack stats between 65 and 70. So by that logic, considering I have 19 defense at level 11, the Magma Slime outgoes me. And the other two bosses used their additional turn to kill me in round 1. Meaning that instead of graciously soloing the 3 at level 11, I had to grind to level 14 in order to survive a hit from the Magma Slime and have Mega Fire, as well as not being able to solo the other two. But past that, I had 2 pretty trivial fights in Cerberus and the Demon. But from there, everything took a nosedive into the f*** you pain train. The study of the Dark Lord was not that tough, but it did require luck since it was AI dependent. But the armor was another level of annoying. The keyword is sword. Land to hand makes the damage output of the other two insanely difficult to withstand. It's enough to, I don't know, drop a 54 HP flower down to 1 HP. So what I needed to do in order to not be under RNG madness was to change my own job to Princess, grind, direct my allies' attacks at the armor, then spam dance. Since while the sword dances, it doesn't go for land to hand. And also the shield doesn't use cover, so that's a plus. Indeed not ceremonious, but effective, and thus we're moving on. But then, with Kira now a scientist, I've discovered a potential hard roadblock in the name of normal enemies. All of the Blue Minotaur, Flaming Wind, and most notably the Fiend were absolute nightmares to face. Flaming Winds hit ridiculously hard, Blue Minotaurs attack twice with good damage output and immense bulk, and Fiends are hard for the typical reasons a Fiend is hard, as well as the fact that physical attackers are nearly unviable in a Boostless run. Yeah, you can probably see the issue here, and indeed I really struggled all the way to the Dark Lord. All of the normal enemy groups gave me a hell of a tough time, especially the one with the required Fiend. Though weirdly enough, Dominic ended up being relatively easy to beat, but sadly that couldn't be said for the Dark Lord. He hits really hard, has a ton of bulk, and has the nightmare status to boot. So the first phase was incredibly hard and annoying. I had to tiptoe around safe spots and keep up offensive pressure even when I died. Meanwhile, the second phase was not hard, but was very stressful. I pretty much beat him like I always did, killing the Dark Lord before the imps, but due to hard hits, I was always afraid of death. But eventually I pulled through. First try, but still hard. Moving on. Now for the Traveler's Hub pack. I started with the Yeti, then went to the Hamburger, which were both pretty scary but much easier than expected. The Yeti, though almost identical to the General from Greenhorn, was just another battle since I had an actual team now. And the Hamburger, while hard hitting, was actually pretty frail, so even though its damage was massive, it wasn't that big of a deal. And most other bosses were on the harder side, but not a total roadblock, with one exception coming from the second part of the ordeal. The Robot and Ice Queen were pretty standard fights, and even got me the shield sprinkles, but the Wolf-O-Wisp was hard. Very hard. Just like last time, it hit hard, hit thrice per turn, and had recovery that out-healed the damage I could dish out as well. I employed the same strategy as last time, with Mage, Warrior, Flower, and Imp. Defense drops, bulk, relative power, and healing all on the same team. Truthfully, while the dog was hard, it was 100% beatable. For sure easier than it was last time. After that, I went to get Vampire, then got it and grinded Ellie with it to the same level as the rest of the team while doing some side quests. Until I got to the Deadly Demons and said, you know what? I don't want to take 80 damage from 3 bosses much bulkier than anything else I've fought prior and faster than the rest of my team. I ain't doing that. Moving on. Now it's time for the climax, the skyscraper it is. And it wasn't sparing us for even a single second. Oh no, it was tough. First of all, the Orochis and Crystals gave me a hard time. Both very strong and very bulky. So I had to do a merry little dance every single time one showed up. The fight against the 4 Crystals is where I truly struggled. But then, after somewhat easily beating the Phantom of Evil, honestly I've got no clue how, well, I don't know, apparently I didn't learn my lesson in Greenhorn about stall or physical based teams in a Boostless run because I had a similar occurrence here in the Skyscraper. The question is why, and the answer is Stone. So when I got my party split into 2, I had all of my Magic Offense teammates going up against the Gold General, which was a breeze as always, by the way. And while the Pharaoh 2 itself was pretty easy to beat, with Hyper Sprinkles and Robin dashing through it with relative ease, the normal enemy groups before Pharaoh 2 were on another level. You see, the only attacker I had on that side of the boulders was Robin. Thus, the team's damage output wasn't very high due to him being a physical attacker with his warrior job. I could use Hyper Sprinkles on Robin, but it was a very risky gambit for a number of reasons. But most notably because of the enemy's status effects and their damage output being absolutely bonkers. What the hell, game? Not only did they do crazy damage, which I know was crazy high since most of my team consisted of some of the bulkiest jobs in the game, not only were those hits coming off of AoE moves, but also those stupid owls exist. And they caused the vacancy status, which is basically a defense drop, and as such, most attacks would OHKO even the bulkiest of my team members. And their bulk was high too, so they barely took much damage. Not to mention the fact that I also had to get pretty lucky with what moves my team used since they were all AI controlled. Meaning that sprinkle and safe spot management was garbage and this took a lot of time to do. But eventually I pulled through. Besides that, every other notable fight was not too hard. But I also assume I got pretty lucky on things like the Red Frog, with me surviving hits and the like. But the barrier I got in the way for sure helped. Heck, even the Darker Lord wasn't the worst thing in the world, weirdly enough. No, it wasn't easy either, and probably hard? Definitely stressful, but I first tried it without any major casualties. The funny thing is that I think the ease of the Darker Lord comes from me using the Greenhorn team members, which means that the friendship levels were much higher than in a typical Darker Lord fight. A fact helpful with all of Show Off, Warning, Share, Get Well Soon, and Avenge, and so many more. So basically, the immense struggle I had back there because of my retarded team composition was actually worth it in the end, which is honestly great to know because I'd still cry about that team in bed from time to time if not. Overall, the Boostless run is still one of my favorites, but from playing it now, 2 years after I did earlier, I've learned a lot of things about the run as a whole, and how much easier it was than I originally made it out to be. Still not totally easy though, and I'm honestly stunned I managed to pull off the things I did back then, because some of these battles, particularly the Wolf-O-Wisp, were very tough. Still, I highly recommend you to try this run out, especially if you want to do more challenge runs about Miitopia. And, well, that's it!